The California we know today is really only possible because we move water around. Moving water from areas of abundance to areas of need and literally causing the desert to bloom.
California is about to release 350,000 acre-feet of water into the ocean. Many water districts have written a letter to Governor Newsom to not do this release because this water is well needed in their areas. And there's new study that shows that this water may not impact the Delta smelt much.
It's very likely that we got a dry year or 2 or 3 right around the corner. And having this water in storage or in the ground is pretty important.
My guest today is Geoff Vanden Heuvel. He's a water expert. He's gonna tell us why this release of water may not impact the Delta smelt much and what this water means for the rest of California.
We really cannot afford to waste water in this state. We have to make sure that when we do dedicate water to the environment, that it does good and that we protect the environment. We absolutely want to do that and have an obligation to do that. But we have to maximize the amount of water that we store in these wet years so that we have it in the dry years.
I'm Siyamak. Welcome to California Insider. Geoff, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
We want to talk to you about water today. You're a water expert. You've been involved with water in California. And there is a letter from water agencies across California that's asking California government to actually reconsider how much water they're releasing to the ocean, if I'm correct on this. Before we get into this, I want to understand if you can give us a background on what's going on with water in California.
The California we know today is really only possible because we move water around. The southern part of the state where a lot of the population is, in the Central Valley where there's a lot of agriculture, really wouldn't be able to sustain either the population or the agriculture without major water systems and projects being built, many of them in the early 20th century and some even before that. In terms of enough local water, we have the Los Angeles River, we have the San Gabriel River in Southern California, we have the Santa Ana River. Those are the kind of the 3 main rivers that drain the Southern California plain. When they have water in nature is in the winter. That water falls on the mountains of Southern California and heads straight out to the ocean. And so fast and in such volumes, we have a difficult time controlling it. So there are some groundwater basins in Southern California, but there's really only enough native water in Southern California to support maybe 5 to 10% of the population that exists there. And San Diego really, doesn't have much groundwater at all because it's sitting on much more of a rock geology, and there's really not much groundwater in San Diego. So San Diego wouldn't be possible in any significant. So if you think of Southern California being San Diego, Orange County, Los Angeles, absent San Bernardino, absent the importation of water from hundreds of miles away, Southern California wouldn't be possible. Same thing in the San Joaquin Valley. In the San Joaquin Valley, there's about 5 million acres of irrigated agriculture. It's really hard to fathom. You have mile after mile after mile of agriculture, about 250 different crops that are grown in the Central Valley. It is absolutely a marvel. But it wouldn't be possible if we didn't have these water systems. Now, in the agriculture context, it's a combination of water projects, surface water that comes actually off of the Sierras, which are right there to the east of the San Joaquin Valley, and some of this Northern California water that comes in, and some of the San Joaquin River, and then some groundwater. And it's a vast groundwater basin, but it's been pumped heavily. And so we're in the process of having to balance out that pumping and reduce pumping so that we're sustainable. We've actually mined a lot of water out of the San Joaquin Valley. But all of this is context for this Delta region because as I described this, the Delta is really kind of the valve through which the 2 major surface water projects that both sustain the Central Valley agriculture and Southern California, Central California, and the coast. This water has to physically move between Northern California and then the central and southern part of the state. And it passes through the Delta. And the delta is about 700,000 more or less acres, so it's a very large geographical region. Originally, it was marshland and all the things that you can imagine a delta would be. And as people came to California, they basically began to berm this area up and dry out these drier, kind of move the water in the delta into channelize it. It's a complex area, and it's a mixing zone between fresh and salt water. Really, the only thing that keeps the salt water from inundating the delta, much of which is below sea level, is freshwater outflow from these rivers. So you have to keep fresh water moving out all the time to keep the salt water from coming back. And so that's really where we get to this letter, because California built these systems and was operating them. And there was a big change in policy in California in the early 1990s. Some of it was deliberate. There was a reauthorization necessary for the federal portion of this surface water system, the Central Valley Project. And there was a bill passed in the Congress that was signed by the president that actually reallocated some of the yield of that system to the environment, about 10% of the yield of that. About 1 million acre feet out of about.
Is it out of the fresh water?
Yes, and there was a policy decision to dedicate some of that water to the environment. But at the same time, there are also 2 species of fish that were listed as endangered. There was a delta smelt that was listed as endangered, and there was the winter run Chinook salmon, which obviously lives, part of its life in the ocean, and part of its life it comes up to spawn. And so it goes through this delta area. And when it spawns, it needs very cold water in order to be successful in its spawning. And so the point is that the delta area is got ecological value and benefit. And so we're trying to do multiple things.
We're covering California issues, as you know. If you want us to cover the stories that are impacting your day-to-day life in California, reach out to me at siyamak@californiainsider.com. You mentioned California wouldn't be possible without these water projects. Can you tell us more?
There's a quote from a guy named, an author actually, named Hinton Helper, who was from North Carolina. In 1855, Hinton Helper came out to California. We had just become a state. In 1850, California became a state. Had the gold rush going on, 1849. And there was all this hype in the rest of the country about California, this land of gold. So he came out and he spent a couple of years traveling the state, going to every little community and actually counting how many buildings and what the economic value was and what the economic potential was of this new state in the Union. And he wrote articles, and when he got back to North Carolina, he compiled these articles into a book called California Gold, Fact or Fiction. And in his book, he says, balancing resource against defect and comparing territory with territory, California is the poorest state in the Union. Other than some interesting metal, her valleys will grow sufficient breadstuffs to support sparse populations. Now that is what California looked like to him in 1855. And obviously it is dramatically different from the California that we experience today. And what made the difference? What made the California we see today grow out of the California he saw 175 years ago? And there's one thing that made that happen, besides phenomenal people, but it was moving water around. Moving water from areas of abundance to areas of need, and literally causing the desert to bloom. So that system formed the foundation of building the state of California. And without it, and this is something we don't pay a lot of attention to, but if we don't take care of it, it has an impact on who we are and what we are. And so water and its manipulation is critical to making California what it is and to keeping it sustainable for the long term.
So moving water from Northern California to Southern California.
Yeah, 2/3 or more of the water falls in the northern 40% of the state. But the population and a huge amount of agriculture is in the southern part of the state. So there's a mismatch between the water where it falls and where the demands are to sustain what we built here. So there needs to be a infrastructure to move that water around, and there is. I mean, Southern California has basically 3 straws that it draws water from. There's the Los Angeles Aqueduct from the Eastern Sierra. There's the Colorado River Aqueduct from the Colorado River, and then there's the State Water Project, which comes from Northern California. And all 3 of them have problems. All 3 of them have challenges. And so we're trying to, do our best to manage our way through that, and we will. We will. But yeah, California wouldn't exist today as we know it, anything close to it, if it were not for, frankly, the vision and the risk taking. I mean, when the city of Los Angeles built the Los Angeles Aqueduct, the amount of money they were committing to was a huge percentage of what the value of the tax value of Los Angeles at that time was. The population of Los Angeles was very small in 1905 relative to what they were committing to.
So they were taking risk investing in these water projects.
And the same thing on the Colorado River Aqueduct. They spent, I won't give numbers because I'll get them wrong, but a huge percentage of the taxable wealth. And they taxed themselves to build these projects. Both the Los Angeles Aqueduct and the Colorado River Aqueduct were built exclusively with the money that was generated from Southern California. There was not federal and state money that came in to build those projects. And the State Water Project was financed by the state, but is being repaid by the water users. It wasn't like these were grants that built these things.
It's 170 years ago. The person that came here to discover to actually analyze California thought that this state is not possible. But the state did it with the water projects. Do you think in the future, the way we're treating water, it's gonna stop our development?
Well, we do need to do major investments. There's no question about that. One of the things about California that is unique is the people that come here. I mean, that's really what makes California is the people. And they're very innovative and they're very adaptable. So we have real challenges, and we're going to have to invest a lot of money to make this system sustainable over time. But the point is that there were people before us who made investments that made it possible for us to be here. Those types of visionaries did that. And as we developed the different facets, there were some interesting people. William Mulholland was the person who was behind the Los Angeles Aqueduct and also an engineer that designed the Colorado River Aqueduct. He was an Irish immigrant, really not formally trained as an engineer, but just a really brilliant
So he
man.
designed the whole aqueduct.
Yeah, that was his brainchild, and actually,
And it doesn't use any electricity, right?
the Los Angeles Aqueduct, that water flows by gravity all the way from down 395. You ever go up 395 up to Mammoth? It's really remarkable to think about the fact that he saw that riding on horseback. There really weren't roads up to Bishop in those days. I mean, they were. They built that system with horses and various. There's fascinating pictures of big sections of pipe that were placed, and then they had a tunnel through mountains without modern equipment, and they started on both sides and they met each other in the middle. You're talking in 1905, wow. 1903, 1904. So just incredible ingenuity and vision. We have a different environment today.
And the city of Los Angeles paid for all of it.
The city of Los Angeles needed to expand because part of the permit that enabled them to take the water from the Eastern Sierra was that it had to go to the city of Los Angeles, and the town itself wasn't large enough to justify as much water as they were securing. So that's when the San Fernando Valley was incorporated into the city of Los Angeles. And then, of course, they had to build the canal, the pipeline and canal, a combination of both. And so they had more water than what the existing city could use. And so the San Fernando Valley was able to become farmed. And and for 40 years, actually, the county of Los Angeles was the largest, by way of income, agriculture county in the United States.
Wow.
The county of Los Angeles, because they were doing very high value citrus, particularly in the San Fernando Valley. And then as the town grew, that citrus converted over to urbanization, and there's not a whole lot of citrus left there. But that same story was repeated in multiple communities. Rancho Cucamonga used to be full of vineyards, and Upland in the Inland Empire was citrus, and San Bernardino had a lot of farming. So there was a lot of farming that eventually was urbanized. But these were folks that came out here to make a better life for themselves, and they realized they needed to marshal the water resources that existed, to hold them and to utilize them. And that was, and I hope it still is, that human flourishing is a value that we have as a society. Yes, we want to take care of the environment. I don't see those in conflict. In order for the environment to do well, our economy and our humans need to do well as well. And that's when we have the resources where we can do a good job of balancing all of these various demands.
If you like California Insider and you like to know what's going on in California, make sure to check out Epoch Times. This is a newspaper that started by a group of Chinese Americans because of human rights abuses in China, and now is starting to grow here. Make sure to go to the Epoch Times website and check out the California section, where you can get a lot of fresh perspectives on what's going on in California. Now let's go back to the interview. So we're trying to get water for agriculture, we're trying to get water for the cities down in Southern California, and at the same time we're going to supply the environment,
right.
those
That's
species.
Right. We have to be respectful and we have to protect the environment. But the one thing about the Endangered Species Act is it's a very powerful law. And when a species gets listed as endangered, really the law is pretty clear. There's nothing you're allowed to do to hurt that species. And economic considerations really aren't to be taken into account, which is a pretty remarkable law. There's a variety of ways to comply with the law, but typically what happens when a species is listed endangered, and it happened with the Delta smelt and the winter run Chinook salmon, is that there's a biological opinion that, they get the fish experts in there and they try to say, okay, what steps can we take to preserve this species? And they come up with rules and, actual operating rules, to govern the operation of the pumps. And there's other things that are going on too that are hurting the species or could help the species, like better habitats and this sort of thing. So there's a variety of ways. But the most impactful to the water users is restrictions that they put on pumping. So one of the restrictions that was put in this operating plan for the Delta smelt was that in particular types of water years, every year is classified by how much precipitation we have in the state, and particularly in the water-bearing parts of the state. And that ranges from wet to dry to very dry.
Depending on how much rain we have in these areas.
That's right. So there's different, and each year gets a classification, and it fits into this. And one of the rules for the Delta smelt was in wet or above normal classification years, there's a requirement to, and now here's where the X2 comes from. X2 is jargon that, it's regulatory jargon that refers to where the fresh water, where the line is, where the fresh water and the salt water meet. And the measuring point is the Golden Gate Bridge, okay? So
is that on the regular basis? It should meet the
yes.
Golden
Oh, yeah. So this line moves as you would imagine. So think about California before there were dams, right? There wasn't any control of these rivers. Mm-hmm. So in wet years, this water would
just water is coming, and then when it's dry,
and then really dry years, this salt line would come up, and there's reports of it coming almost as high as Sacramento in history, in really, really dry years. So this line moves, but this regulation required that this fall X2 is that in the fall, September and October, of above normal and wet years, this line needs to be closer to the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, so these regulations have been in place more or less for 20 plus years. And they've had a big impact on water users. And
Because essentially, to keep that line, you have to release a lot of
You have
water
to
from
release
the,
water
from
to-
the
that's
dams
right,
and
to
the
push-
reservoirs to push.
Exactly.
So essentially, you have to put the water into the ocean instead of giving it to the ag and to
Well,
the consumer.
using it
Or
for any other purpose,
purposes.
right? Because you got to move this salt line. So there's been a lot of scientific work because these are very important issues in terms of, and they're very costly issues. This science has been encouraged by these various regulatory agencies, and recently, within the last year, there has been science that has questioned very substantively and with a lot of credibility, questioned the value of this particular regulation, this requirement that in wet and above normal years that you should necessarily move this.
So release
line.
enough water
Yeah.
so the line has to
Right.
be at the Golden Gate Bridge. Is that
Well,
or closer?
it's a measurement. The measurement is from the Golden Gate Bridge. It isn't at the Golden Gate Bridge. It's how many miles away from the Golden Gate Bridge.
Based on how much rain we had, right? Is that
Based on the type of water year that you have. Okay, so this is an above normal year. It's barely an above normal year, 2024, but it is classified as an above normal year that triggered this particular regulation. There is the ability to do adaptive management if there's agreement by the agencies that have responsibility for managing the delta smelt and these biological opinions. These are legally enforceable rules, but there is built in there some flexibility that if they get new science or if they have a justification, they can modify these rules. So 2024. Fall X2 is triggered because we're a above normal year, and so the schedule is to release this fresh water to push this freshwater line out closer to the bay.
how much fresh water is that?
The calculation is it's about 350,000 acre feet, okay? And the science that has emerged particularly in the last year has said this does the smelt virtually no benefit, okay? It's just not the right time. They're not there. There's not a value or not much value to Fall X2. Okay, so
releasing this water
that's right.
to push this
That's
line
right.
back.
So the water agencies that have responsibility of delivering water, the state water contractors that, there's 20 plus agencies that receive, including Southern California and the Central Coast, that receive water from the state water contract. The Friant, which is the San Joaquin water that goes down to Bakersfield, that's the Friant Water Users Association, that's a water authority. It's in charge of that. The Delta Mendota Water Authority is in charge of the federal part of the water that comes out of the Delta. And then Westlands Water District, which is a very large district that receives water. They wrote a letter to the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Water Resources and asked them to use their adaptive authorities to reduce or eliminate this Fall X2 requirement and therefore save this 350,000 acre feet.
So is this 350,000 acre feet going to stay? If it's not released, would this stay in the reservoirs or would they get distributed to farmers and cities?
It'd probably be a combination. If there was room to hold it in the reservoir, most of these reservoirs have flood control responsibilities. If you get a really wet year, you have to have room in these reservoirs to take these floods. So some would probably stay in the reservoir. Some would be pumped and sent down at this time of year pretty much for groundwater recharge, and so that we can store it or store it in surface water reservoirs that we have. And so, yeah, there would be a place, but the point is that it wouldn't go to the ocean. Once it goes to the ocean, we can't use it. Okay, so that was the request. Followed on to that, a day or two later, the San Joaquin Valley Water Blueprint, which I'm part of, sent a letter, and that was co-signed by the Southern California Water Coalition. So the Southern California Water Coalition is a broad-based water group that involves cities, counties, agriculture, business, labor, and it's been around over 40 years. I mean, it's a water advocacy group for Southern California, and the San Joaquin Valley Water Blueprint is a similar group for the San Joaquin Valley. It's much younger. It's only been around about 4 years, but it represents the broader community of stakeholders that actually uses this water. So we sent a letter. We sent it to Governor Newsom and to Secretary of Interior, believing that Governor Newsom is a representative of the people. He works for all of us. He represents all of us. And these agencies that have this authority are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Interior and the governor. And I know there's been a lot of other folks as they become aware of this who've weighed in and encouraged the state agencies and the federal agencies who have this adaptive authority to exercise that authority and try to save this 350,000 acre feet, since it's very likely that we got a dry year or 2 or 3 right around the corner. And having this water in storage or in the ground is pretty important for us. I mean, the way California is going to work in the future is, we have to take care of the environment, but if we have to maximize the amount of water that we store in these wet years, so that we have it in the dry years.
Now, how much is 350,000 acres for some of us?
Yeah.
We are not water people.
Yeah, acre feet. Well, an acre foot is 326,000 gallons. Okay, so that's 1 acre feet. 1 acre foot is 326,000 gallons. The city of San Diego uses 175,000 acre feet a year.
Wow.
Okay.
So it's 2 years for just the
350,000 acre feet is 2 years worth of the city of San Diego's water consumption. So it's not an insignificant amount of water.
And you mentioned that this can be charging the ground,
right?
The groundwater.
Yeah.
And we don't have storage in California. We've heard from some water experts that we haven't been able to build water storage. Can you tell us more about this ground storage?
I think that
is that true?
I think
or
that's
is there...
not true. We built a lot of storage. There's probably more storage, above ground storage that we could build, but I think it is important, and not stepping on anybody's toes, but the reality is that we went through a period in the United States where we sent engineers to look at every good spot that you could put a dam. North America had been thoroughly explored in terms of opportunities, and we built thousands of dams, thousands of them. And we built pretty much anything we could find somebody to pay for, and because in order to build a reservoir, there needs to be an economic benefit from that, and that economic benefit has to pay for the very significant cost of building that reservoir. We built most of the easy ones, or the good ones, the ones that penciled out, and what we got left are things that got passed over in history. For one reason or another, they got passed over. And so going back now, there aren't a lot of great sites to do further above ground storage. There's a few. The Sites Reservoir, which we probably heard about, it's a dry canyon. It wouldn't dam up a river, and it's very, very expensive. But it's one that has quite a bit of support. Raising Shasta Dam probably makes the most sense. If we raised it another 18 or 20 feet, and it would be very good for the salmon, because the salmon need that cold water that comes from the bottom of Lake Shasta. The salmon, when they spawn, need 55-degree water. If it's 57, they die. So it's having that water, that cold water. So that one makes sense. There may be a few others that do, but for the most part, where our storage opportunities are in underground storage. The San Joaquin Valley has, we've been pumping a lot of water. What has left is space to percolate more water in the ground. And we could store tens of millions of acre feet of water in the San Joaquin Valley. And one of the things that's changed, I spoke to you about the groundwater that agriculture uses. And up until 2014, there was no regulation of groundwater pumping.
So anybody could pump as much as they want?
You could put a well in and start pumping. People who developed farming and used just groundwater, they did nothing illegal, unethical. They added tremendous value to that ground by growing crops, developing jobs, developing tax base. But we have taken more water out of the ground than what gets recharged. Now, I would be remiss not to say that the policy decisions that took place in the early 1990s, the net effect of the Endangered Species Act operating plans and the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, in round figures, it's a couple million acre feet of water a year that used to come into Central and Southern California that now doesn't because of these regulations. since there was nothing illegal, unethical, or wrong about replacing that water from the ground,
So we've been pumping the water
we've been
from...
pumping. So now the law was passed in 2014 called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and it's a long-term law. It anticipates it will take 20 to 25 years to bring this into sustainability. But the bottom line is that we're going to have to reduce groundwater pumping to a point where we don't take any more water out of the ground than what we can replace. In that scenario, though, where groundwater is unregulated, there wasn't the big incentive to grab flood flows from wet years. When we have a wet year in California, it is absolutely phenomenal how much water actually falls on this state. It's hundreds of millions of acre feet of water.
But we lose that, right?
Well, a lot of it can't be captured just because of where it is, but a lot of it could be. Okay, and we haven't really had an incentive to do it in the Central Valley until now. And with a realization that groundwater pumping is going to be restricted, suddenly there was an incentive to grab these flows that come at the wrong time of year. When they come in January and February, you're not growing a crop because the crop doesn't grow till late spring and into the summer. So that water is a nuisance to you. Okay, it could damage your crops, or so the incentive was to just try to minimize the flood damage and keep that water moving. But we had
because you can take out of the ground later,
Yes.
right? You can do it whenever you need it.
Exactly. Well, that entire paradigm has changed. Okay, because now all the farmers know that they're going to be regulated in their groundwater, and now these flood flows have become tremendous assets to take as much as we can of these flows, because they're surplus to anything the environment needs. They're surplus, and to put those flows in the ground. And during 2023, which was a very wet year, in really an ad hoc fashion, Governor Newsom, to his credit, issued a couple of executive orders that facilitated taking advantage of this water, because we have while groundwater was not regulated at all, pumping it out of the ground was not regulated. Surface water has always been regulated, or regulated for well over 100 years. So the permission to take water out of a surface body is governed by the state. And so here you have surplus waters in a flood year, and the governor issued some executive orders that enabled particularly farmers to be able to take that flood water in that flood year. And what they did was they just ran it over their fields, and they percolated it down and soaked it down into the ground and started to replenish the aquifer. And what we were able to do in 2023 in an ad hoc way was, my estimation is close to 2 million acre feet of additional water was put into the ground in 2023 because of actions by farmers to take advantage of this water. And with some planning, which is what the San Joaquin Valley Water Blueprint is all about, is figuring out what infrastructure can we build, what connections can we build to take maximum advantage of these flood flows in these wet years. And that's going to be the management program for California going forward. We're going to need to maximize the amount of water we hang on to in these wet years to get us through the dry years. And the good news on the, kind of the rest of the story on these letters, and we don't have a final answer yet, is that it does seem like the state, the Secretary Crowfoot is the Secretary of Natural Resources. This week he was speaking at an event in Fresno, and he's clearly heard the issue, heard the concern about Fall X2, says they're working on modifying, and so there is at least hope that there'll be some adaptive management of this Fall X2, and this will have been at least somewhat successful in hanging on to some of this 350,000 acre foot. Secretary Crowfoot said, we realize we have to adaptively manage, and we have to recognize new science when it comes. So these were positive comments, and we hope they're followed through with action, because we really cannot afford to waste water in this state. We have to make sure that when we do dedicate water to the environment, that it does good, and that we protect the environment. We absolutely want to do that, and have an obligation to do that, both to the environment, to ourselves, and to posterity. But we have to be smart about how we do it. And, we built a wonderful, fantastic place that is California. It's got a lot of problems, but I was born in the Midwest, moved here when I was 15. I love this place despite all of its problems. And there's a lot of us here that came from somewhere else. And there is hope. And so we'll keep working at it.
Geoff Vanden Heuvel, Director of Regulatory and Economic Affairs at Milk Producers Council. It was great to have you on California Insider.
Well, it was an honor and a pleasure to be here.